This video is the tutorial for the homework for the Pallant SPSS Survival Manual Chapter 7 homework. As you can see, I've got my survey.save file already open in SPSS. I did discover that as I was looking at the instructions, I said follow the instructions in Chapter 7. Well, here's the thing. When I do charts and graphs using SPSS, I am not a fan of Chart Builder. So the instructions that you're given in Chapter 7, you can either follow those or you can follow my instructions on the homework step by step. And that's what I'm going to give you a tutorial on, because I find that using the legacy dialogues through, when you click on graphs, you have a choice. You can either go through Chart Builder or you can go through legacy dialogues. These are the older versions. They have somewhat fewer options, but I found over my years of work, both in my own research and research with students, I have never once needed anything more complicated than the legacy dialogues. They're easier to manipulate, they're easier to use, there are less complicated instructions. And my final reasoning for going this route instead of the instructions used in the Pallant text, I noticed that there were some discrepancies in Pallant's instructions between what she was apparently seeing on her version of SPSS and what we would see in our version. So I think for all of our sanity's sake, we'll just stick with the legacy dialogues. So in number 1, on your Chapter 7 homework, I've asked you to describe what you see in the histogram of scores for total self-esteem, for the total self-esteem scale. And what I've instructed you to do is to go to Graphs and select Legacy Dialogues and go down to Histogram. And then in the dialog box, in the variable box rather, I want you to select TSL FEST, Total Self-Esteem. And I want you to add that as the variable in the variables box. And that's all you need to do. You don't need to do anything else for number 1. You can go ahead and click OK. Now in the homework, I'm asking you describe what you see. So when you go through the quiz section on D2L, I want you to give me a verbal description of what you see. So you're going to describe the skew that you see in this histogram, where most of the scores are piled up at the higher end with a pretty significant negative skew, where the tail of the distribution of scores is pulled toward the low end. So you need to give me that verbal description. Now in number 2, I want you to describe what you see in the bar graph of scores for total self-esteem, and this time breaking it down for males and females across 3 age groups. So here we're working with 3 different variables simultaneously. And in my step-by-step, I say go to Graphs again, to Legacy Dialogues, to Bar, and you're going to select Clustered. Apologies, dogs. So you're selecting Clustered, and you want to make sure that the box is checked that says Summaries for Groups of Cases. Then you're going to click Define, and it will open up the dialog box. Under Bars Represent, you're going to select Other Statistic, and that opens up the variable box, and you're going to put total self-esteem in that variable box. Next, you're going to enter Age Group 3 as the category axis, And then you're going to select sex for defined clusters. So you have to go all the way back up to the top and enter that for defined clusters, and then you're ready to go. And I have a problem with my screen. Sometimes this happens with the size of the screen kind of cuts off your ability to see what's at the bottom. So that you can click OK. I apologize. This is very frustrating. There it is. Okay, there we go. Now what you see on the output, and again I'm asking you in the homework when you enter this into the quiz space, I want you to give a verbal description of what you see. Across the bottom what you see is your 3 categories of age groups. You have 18 to 29, 30 to 34, and over 45. When you look at, just at the age groups, what you see is not a lot of difference between the age groups. They all are within roughly the same range. You do see the largest difference between males and females in the 30 to 44 range, where you have males showing significantly higher, well, I should take that back. I don't know what the significance test result is. Males appear to score higher than females. In the oldest age group, males and females appear virtually identical. In the youngest age group, again, males and females appear to be pretty much the same. You do note slightly lower scores for the youngest group in comparison to the oldest group. So that's the kind of verbal description I want you to give me. All right, so we're ready for number 3. And here I'm asking you to describe what you see in a scatter plot of scores on age, the relationship between age and total scores on the optimism scale. So again, I have you go to Graphs, Legacy Dialogues, and Scatter Dot. And here I instruct you to select Simple Scatter. And then I click Define. I'm going to put Total Optimism on the y-axis. And I'm going to put Age on the x-axis. And that's all I need to do, so then I'm going to click OK. Now what you're given here is a fairly messy, in my opinion, a fairly messy scatter plot. That's not a technical term, that's just my description. But you have to kind of imagine the way correlation works, the way regression and correlation work. You have to imagine if I were to draw a straight line that would pierce this cluster of dots, where would it go? And it would tend to run, if you follow my cursor, kind of like this, where you do see, a lot of scores that are hovering up here where I'm circling, but there is a general trend as people age, their optimism tends to increase. So that's an example of how you would give a verbal description of that scatter plot. Now the test that you would run after that to find out, what's the statistical significance of the possible relationship between these variables will be a correlation. So the scatter plot is essentially a descriptive way of verbalizing that. All right, next, number 4, we're going to do a box plot of scores. And this time we're looking at total negative affect for males and females. So again, we go to graphs and legacy dialogues, and box plot, and we are going to select simple, and we want to again make sure that the option is selected for summaries for groups of cases, and then we click define. Next step, we enter total negative affect. The total negative affect as variable, and we're selecting sex as the category axis. And then we're ready, so we click OK. So with total negative affect, and I ask you to describe what you see, now you should make sure, since most of us are not, on an everyday basis exposed to box plots, and I will admit they're not my favorite kind of visual to look at. I tend to find them a bit busy and confusing. But you imagine this dark line is in the middle of the boxes is the mean for the group. The lines that extend out, they give you a way of visualizing the extremities. So the top line, that would be the highest score among the females, the bottom line, the lowest score among the females, same for males, a bottom line, a top line. Now this little pile of items up here hovering outside of that upper limit, those are individual respondents who may be identified as outliers in that group. So that would mean that you would need to go and do some further looking at your data to ensure that those aren't outliers that need to be removed, or whether they can be tolerated. Okay, number 5. Here I've asked you to describe what you see in the line graph of the total self-esteem scale for males and females across the 3 age group categories. This time we are going to go to graphs, again, legacy dialogues, and we're going to select line. And this time we want to select multiple. And again, we want to make sure summaries for groups of cases is checked. Then we click define. Under lines represent, you're going to select the box that says other statistic. We're going to go down and find total self-esteem. There it is. And put that in the variable box. Then we're going to add age group 3 as our category axis. And we're going to add sex as defined lines by. And then we're ready to go. So I've asked you to give me a verbal description of what you see. So the light blue line is the males, the green line is the females in the sample. Across the bottom axis you have the 3 different age groups. So you've got the age group for 18 to 29, 30 to 44, and then over 45. Now first you can say, based on age, what trend do you see? Well, the trend that I see based on age is generally as people age, their self-esteem tends to go up, regardless of their sex. Now when we look at sex, one thing you can see is that at all 3 ages, males have higher self-esteem than females. In particular, the largest gap for between males and females is during that 30 to 44 age time period. So you start out, males have an advantage when they're young, but it's a modest advantage. They have a slight advantage when they're older. It's in the middle years. You could theorize, maybe that's because that's when they're raising children. Not surprising. We put a lot of the onus on moms, and this is also the prime years for career and career advancement. So what we're seeing is the largest gap between males and females is in that middle age group. So that completes the tasks for homework, the homework for Chapter 7 on using graphs.